They called my father's soil calendar backward because half of it was written in Spanish and the other half in the quiet language of rain. The dairy conglomerate across the valley had drones, nutrition software, stainless barns, and more cows than my whole hometown had people. I had 63 acres, one red barn, and a pasture rotation my father brought with him when he crossed into this country with 2 shirts and a pocket full of seed. Caroline Mercer laughed when she saw my handwritten grazing notes. She said modern dairy could not be run by old country superstition. Then summer turned hard. Their fields cracked, their herd weakened. Their expensive feed plan failed one hungry week at a time. But my grass stayed green. And when their last healthy cows were moved off the valley, my soil was still holding water like it remembered every lesson my father left behind. My name is Mateo Alvarez, and I learned to read soil before I learned to read English. My father, Tomas, used to kneel in the pasture at dawn, scoop a handful of earth, and hold it under my nose like other fathers held report cards. Smell, he would say. Good soil breathes. Back then, I thought he was only being poetic. Later, I understood he was teaching me the first language our farm ever spoke. We lived in Green Hollow Valley, Wisconsin, where dairy country rolled soft and wide under a sky that could turn from blue to bruised in 20 minutes. Our place was small by modern standards. 63 acres, 32 milk cows, one red barn with patched siding, a spring-fed pond, a milking room old enough to complain in winter. Across the valley sat Mercer Dairy Group. Their barns were long, silver, and bright under floodlights. Their feed trucks ran before sunrise. Their cows wore electronic collars. Their fields were planted edge to edge, clean as a spreadsheet, with no weeds, no hedgerows, no wasted corners. People in town called it the future. They called my farm something else. Old-fashioned. That word usually came with a smile, as if kindness made disrespect polite. I rotated my cows through small paddocks. I rested grass longer than neighbors thought sensible. I planted clover, rye, chicory, and deep-rooted grasses my father had written about in his soil calendar. I spread compost slow. I left field edges wild for bees and birds. I watched worms like they were employees. Caroline Mercer watched numbers. She was the chief operations director for Mercer Dairy Group, and she carried herself like every gate in the valley should open before she reached it. She was not loud. Loud people are easier to forgive. Caroline was worse. She was calm, polished, and certain. The first time she came to my farm, she stepped from a white company pickup wearing spotless boots and a cream jacket that had never met manure. She had come with a proposal. Mercer wanted to lease my lower pasture for supplemental forage trials. In plain words, they wanted the one piece of ground in the valley that still held moisture during dry spells. I said no. Caroline looked past me toward my cows grazing knee-high grass. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, "you're underusing this land." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "The land is resting." Her mouth lifted slightly. "That's not a production strategy." "It is if you want the land producing 10 years from now." She glanced at the notebook tucked under my arm. My father's soil calendar. Its pages were stained with rain, milk, and time. "Is that your system?" she asked. "It's part of it." She opened it without asking. Her eyes moved over the Spanish notes, moon dates, rainfall marks, grazing intervals, and little sketches of roots. Then she laughed softly. Not enough for anyone else to call it cruel. Just enough for me to feel it. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, Modern dairy can't be run on old country superstition. I took the calendar back. And for the first time in years, I wished my father were there to answer before my silence did. Caroline left my farm that day with her proposal unsigned. I watched her white pickup roll past the lower pasture, tires barely touching the gravel, and I told myself I had done the right thing. But doing the right thing does not always feel strong. Sometimes it feels like standing alone in a field after someone with more money has just measured how small you are. That evening, I found my daughter Elena at the kitchen table, doing homework beside a bowl of sliced apples. She was 13, sharp-eyed, and old enough to hear things adults thought they had hidden. Her mother had died when Elena was 6, and since then she had learned to read my face the way I read grass. She came about the pasture, Elena asked. Yes. You said no. Yes. She nodded, but worry stayed in her eyes. Can we afford to say no? That question hurt because it was honest. Our milk check had been thin for months. The tractor needed a clutch. The barn roof leaked above the north stall. I still owed money on the bulk tank repair from January. A lease from Mercer Dairy would have paid more in 1 season than my cows could spare in 3. I sat across from her and opened my father's soil calendar between us. The cover was cracked brown leather, tied with a piece of baling twine. Inside, my father had written in Spanish, English, and sometimes in drawings when neither language fit what he meant, rainfall marks, grazing dates, notes about clover bloom, manure texture, hoof softness, worm counts, and which grasses came back sweetest after rest. Elena touched one page. Abuelo wrote all this. Most of it. And you still follow it. I try. She looked out the window toward Mercer's bright barns across the valley. Even from our kitchen, their lights made a glow against the dark. They have computers, she said. I know. And people with college degrees. I know that too. She looked back at me. Then how do you know we're right? I wanted to give her a brave answer. Instead, I gave her the only true one. I don't know for sure, I said, but I know our soil is alive, and I know land that is alive does not quit as fast. The next week, Caroline's words began traveling through town. Not loudly, not in a way anyone could accuse her of spreading insult, but at the feed store, men stopped talking when I walked in. At church, one woman asked if I had considered modernizing before it was too late. Even the milk hauler, who had always been kind, glanced at my paddocks and said Mercer's way was probably where the industry is headed. I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed everything. That was my old habit. Keep quiet. Be grateful. Do not make trouble. My father had taught me dignity, but America had taught me caution. Then, in late June, the rain stopped. At first, no one worried. By July, the valley grass began to yellow. By August, Mercer's fields looked tired under the sun. And my father's calendar opened to a page marked with one sentence. When the sky closes, trust the roots. Drought does not arrive like a storm. It does not knock down trees or rattle windows. It comes politely at first, one clear morning after another, until the clear mornings stop feeling like mercy. The creek thinned. The pond edge pulled back from the grass. Dust rose behind the milk truck and stayed hanging in the lane long after it left. Across the valley, Mercer Dairy Group kept moving like nothing could touch them. Their sprinklers ran early, silver arcs under the sunrise. Their feed trucks came in heavier loads. Their managers walked with tablets, checking numbers while the fields around them lost color. Roddy, Caroline Mercer appeared twice on the local farm station, speaking about adaptive efficiency and data-driven resilience. At my farm, I did what my father's calendar told me. I moved the cows before grass was bitten too short. I opened the shaded paddock near the old oak. I spread compost tea on the weakest slope. I stopped cutting hay from the lower field even though I needed every bale. I let the roots keep their cover. Elena followed me one evening with a 5-gallon bucket and a worried face. "You're leaving too much grass," she said. "That grass is armor. It looks wasted." I knelt and pushed my fingers through the stems until I reached the soil. It was warm, but not powder. Dark crumbs clung beneath the surface. "Feel this," I said. She crouched beside me and pressed her hand into the ground. Her eyebrows lifted. "It's still damp. That is what rest does." She looked across the valley toward Mercer's fields, where short-cut forage lay pale and thin. "Do they know?" "They know their numbers." "That's not what I asked." I did not answer, because part of me wanted to drive over there, stand in front of Caroline, and make her kneel in my pasture until she understood what she had mocked. But the older part of me, the part trained by years of lowered voices and careful gratitude, stayed quiet. Then the county extension office announced a soil health field walk. Mercer Dairy offered to host. The flyer called their operation the Future of Regional Dairy Resilience. My name was not on it. My farm was not mentioned. Still, every small farmer in the valley knew the event was really a public comparison. Caroline wanted people to see scale, technology, and control. Elena read the flyer at breakfast. "Are you going?" "No." "You should." I was not invited. She looked at me with my wife's stubborn eyes. Abuelo was not invited to this country either. He still came. That landed harder than I expected. So, on Saturday morning, I put on my clean denim shirt, tucked my father's soil calendar under my arm, and drove to Mercer Dairy. Caroline saw me near the demonstration plot. Her smile stayed professional. "Mr. Alvarez," she said, "I didn't expect you." I looked at the cracked ground beneath her perfect sign. "No," I said, "people usually don't." The field walk began beside Mercer Dairy's North Forage plot. A white tent had been raised near the access road with folding chairs, bottled water, and a banner that read, "Resilient Dairy Through Modern Systems." Caroline stood beneath it with 2 agronomists, a feed consultant, and a county extension agent named Harold Price, who looked uncomfortable before anyone said a word. About 40 farmers came, some big operators, some small families, a few who had laughed at my paddocks over the years, and a few who had quietly asked me about clover seed when no one else was listening. Caroline opened with charts. She spoke about yield targets, protein ratios, irrigation efficiency, and herd productivity. Her voice was clear, controlled, impressive. I understood why people trusted her. Certainty has a kind of music, especially when it comes from a microphone. Then Harold invited everyone to examine the soil pit. Mercer's workers had dug a neat square trench beside the demonstration plot. The exposed wall showed 6 inches of dry topsoil over a compacted layer so hard one agronomist had to jab it twice with his knife. Harold pressed a moisture probe into the side. The reading was low. Caroline's expression did not change. We expected stress indicators under current drought conditions. A farmer behind me whispered, "That's a fancy way to say dry." I held my father's calendar tighter. One agronomist lifted a clump of earth. It broke apart like stale cake. There were few roots, fewer worms, and almost no smell beyond dust. Still, the presentation moved on. Caroline explained mitigation plans, supplemental feed, adjusted rations, additional forage contracts. Then someone asked about herd condition. Caroline paused. "Just long enough?" Mercer's cows were not visible from the tent, but everyone in the valley had heard things. Milk volume down, hoof issues up, heat stress, digestive trouble. Too many animals on feed that was changing too fast because the fields were failing too quickly. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue with the soil discussion. That was when Elena stepped forward. Sana. I had not known she was coming. She stood near the edge of the group in her school sneakers and braided hair, holding a small mason jar full of dark soil from our lower pasture. My dad's soil still has moisture, she said. Every head turned. My heart dropped. Elena, I said quietly. But she did not back down. Caroline looked at the jar, then at me. This is not a comparison trial. No, Elena said. It's just dirt that works. A few farmers murmured. Harold took the jar gently and opened it. He smelled it first, the way my father had taught me. Something shifted in his face. Where did this come from, he asked. Our lower paddock, I said. He poured a little into his palm. Dark crumbs held together, then loosened. Fine roots threaded through it. A small worm curled against his thumb. Harold looked from the soil to me. Mr. Alvarez, he said, would you be willing to show us your pasture? Caroline's eyes sharpened. For years, I had kept quiet to survive. That morning, for my daughter, I finally stopped. Yes, I said, but they have to walk it, not just measure it. We crossed the valley in a line of pickup trucks. It would have been funny if my hands had not been shaking on the steering wheel. Farmers who had come to watch Mercer Dairy prove the future were now following my old blue truck toward a 63-acre farm most of them had dismissed for years. Elena sat beside me, quiet now that her courage had already leapt ahead of us. You all right? I asked. She nodded. Are you mad? Yes. Her face fell. Not at you, I said. At myself for needing my 13-year-old daughter to say what I should have said. She looked out the window. Abuelo would have liked that jar. My throat tightened. He would have told you to label the date. That made her smile. When we reached my farm, the difference showed before anyone stepped out. Mercer's fields had looked tired and pale. Mine were not lush like spring, not magical, not untouched by drought, but they were alive. The grass stood ankle to calf high, mixed and uneven, with clover still blooming in small white stars. The shaded paddock smelled warm and green. My cows grazed slowly, not frantic, their coats dusty but their eyes clear. Harold Price knelt first. He pushed a soil probe into the ground. It slid deeper than it had at Mercer's plot. The farmers leaned in. He checked the reading, then looked at me. You've had the same rainfall. Same sky, I said. Caroline stood at the edge of the group, arms folded. Harold dug a small square with his field spade. The soil lifted in dark crumbs bound by roots. Worms moved in the shadowed cut. Fine white fungal threads stretched between pieces like tiny stitching. A young agronomist from Mercer crouched beside him. That structure is excellent, she said before she remembered who paid her. Caroline heard it. So did everyone else. One farmer, old Mr. Klein, broke a clump in his palm. Smells like my dad's fields used to. I opened my father's calendar. This paddock was grazed in May for less than a day, I said, then rested. The clover feeds nitrogen. The deep roots open the ground. The cover keeps sun from baking it. My father said bare soil is a wound. Caroline's expression tightened at the word father. For a moment, she looked less like an executive and more like someone remembering a room she had locked years ago. But she said nothing. Harold asked if I kept records. I handed him the calendar. He turned the pages slowly. At first, I saw the familiar hesitation people had when they met my father's Spanish notes. Then he reached the English translations I had added over the years. Rainfall, hoof pressure, forage recovery, manure condition, milk butterfat, heat stress, rest days. "This is not superstition," Harold said. The words moved through the group like weather. Caroline looked at the calendar, then at my pasture, then at her own fields across the valley. Her doubt had finally found roots. But she was not ready to name it. For 3 days after the field walk, Green Hollow Valley talked about dirt. Not milk prices, not fuel, not the packers, dirt. At the feed store, men leaned over coffee and argued about rest days. At church, Mrs. Bell asked Elena if clover really helped soil eat better. Harold Price called twice, asking whether he could take formal samples from my paddocks and Mercer's demonstration plot for comparison. I said yes. Caroline did not answer him at first. Then the heat sharpened. By the second week of August, Mercer Dairy's trouble could no longer be hidden behind words like stress indicators. Their milk tankers left lighter. Their feed trucks came heavier. A rumor spread that they had moved 200 cows to a facility up north because the valley forage could not hold them. I took no pleasure in that. People think justice always feels sweet. Sometimes it tastes like dust, because animals pay for human arrogance before humans admit the bill is theirs. One evening, I saw 3 Mercer cows near their south fence, ribs showing more than they should, heads low against the heat. I stood there longer than I meant to. Elena came beside me. "Are they sick?" "Tired," I said, "hungry in the wrong way." "Can we help?" I looked at her quickly. Help Mercer. Not Mercer, the cows. That was my daughter. Straight to the place adults step around. The next morning, I loaded 20 small bales from my shaded lower field and drove them to the Mercer service gate. A worker I knew named Ben came out, sweat darkening his shirt. "Mateo," he said, embarrassed before I even spoke. "For the hospital pen," I told him. "Not for Caroline's office." He nodded, eyes wet with something he would not name. I drove away before anyone could thank me. But Caroline saw. She called that afternoon. "Mr. Alvarez," she said. "Ben told me what you did." "They were for the cows." "I understand." "No," I said, surprising myself with the sharpness in my voice. "You don't. Cows are not spreadsheet errors. Soil is not a platform. Grass is not inventory just because your company owns the field." The line went silent. For once, I did not apologize for filling it. Finally, Caroline said, "My father lost our farm when I was 16. I had no answer ready for that. He believed in old methods," she continued. "He rested fields, saved seed, trusted weather signs. Then 3 bad years took everything. I promised myself I would never confuse tradition with survival again." There it was. Not an excuse. A wound. I looked out at my pasture, where the cows grazed slowly under a bruised evening sky. "Maybe your father's methods did not fail," I said. "Maybe he was alone." Caroline breathed in, but did not speak. 2 days later, Harold's soil results came back. My pasture held nearly 3 times the available moisture of Mercer's demonstration plot. And this time, Caroline could not call it superstition. The soil results did not stay private for long. Harold Price released a summary report to the County Extension Board, and from there it spread the way. News always spreads in farm country through pickup windows, feed store counters, and men who pretend they are only mentioning something they heard. By the time Caroline called again, the valley had already chosen a conversation without her permission. This time, She did not open with confidence. I reviewed the comparative moisture data, she said. I know, I answered. A pause. Our agronomy team rechecked Mercer's field samples. And another pause. They confirmed variance beyond expected drought response. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Elena sat nearby, pretending not to listen, but her pencil had stopped moving. That means what I think it means, I asked. It means your soil retained structure and hydration at a statistically abnormal level for this region under current heat conditions. Caroline said it like a sentence she did not yet trust herself to fully own. Behind her voice, I could hear something else now. Not arrogance, not dismissal. Calculation had been replaced by uncertainty, and uncertainty always sounds like a quieter person trying to speak in a louder room. Mr. Alvarez, she continued, we need to revisit the assumptions we made about your management system. My father's system, I corrected. Silence. Then she said something I did not expect. I visited my family's old property file last night. Elena looked up at me. Caroline continued. Before Mercer Dairy was built, my father kept a small mixed farm. I had forgotten most of it, but I remembered something you said about soil resting. I did not answer immediately. People like Caroline do not admit memory lightly. It usually costs them something. What did you find? I asked. A journal, she said. His notes on pasture recovery cycles, written before he sold everything. Her voice lowered slightly. He wrote that the land never forgets what you take from it, only what you return. Elena leaned closer now. Caroline exhaled. We pushed our fields too hard. That was the first time she said it without hiding behind metrics. The valley felt different after that sentence, as if the air itself had shifted weight. Caroline, I said, your system is not wrong because it is modern. It is wrong when it forgets time. Another pause. Then, quieter than before, what would it take to stabilize our herd? I looked at my father's soil calendar on the table. Its pages were worn at the edges, ink softened by years of thumbprints and rain. Rest, I said, and patience you can't measure in quarterly reports. A week later, Mercer Dairy began reducing herd density across 3 fields, not because they were defeated, because for the first time, they were listening. And the land, after months of strain, finally started to breathe again. The first rain after the drought came quietly. No thunder, no dramatic storm, just a steady gray sky that settled over Green Hollow Valley like something forgiving a long argument. I stood at the edge of my lower pasture while the soil darkened under the water. Elena was beside me. Hood pulled up, watching the clover straighten as if it remembered how to breathe again. Behind us, Mercer Dairy was not celebrating. Their adjustments had come too late for some fields, not failure in the way people imagine collapse, but something more complicated, loss of uniformity, uneven recovery, pockets of ground that refused to respond at the same speed as their system required. Caroline called that afternoon. Her voice was different again, not uncertain this time, not defensive, careful. We are implementing rotational rest protocols across all southern parcels, she said. I heard. I wanted you to know it is based on your field data comparison. Elena looked at me when she said that. I understood what Caroline was really doing, not copying, not admitting defeat. Something harder for people like her adjusting identity without calling it failure. That's a big shift, I said. It is necessary. A pause. Then she added, I reviewed my father's journal again. I waited. He wrote that soil does not respond to ownership, only to treatment. I glanced out at my pasture, where water now gathered in soft patches between grass blades, So what happens now? I asked. Another pause, longer this time. We reduce herd pressure further, she said. We are also opening a soil collaboration request. Informal, if you are willing. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. It was the first time Mercer Dairy had used the word collaboration instead of acquisition, lease, or optimization. I did not answer immediately, because acceptance carries its own weight, not pride, not fear, responsibility. You don't need me to fix your system, I said finally. I know, Caroline replied, but I think my system needs to remember things it deleted. After the call ended, Elena and I walked the fence line. The grass was greener than it had been in months. Earthworms had returned to the surface after rain. The smell of wet soil rose in waves, thick and alive. Dad, Elena said, does this mean we won? I looked across the valley. Mercer Barnes stood quieter now. Not defeated, not dominant, just learning. No, I said. She frowned. Then what is it? I thought of my father's hands pressing soil into mine when I was a boy. I thought of his calendar, inked in 2 languages so nothing important would be lost between worlds. It means the land got to speak, I said. Elena nodded slowly, like she understood something she had been waiting years to hear. That night, I placed the soil calendar back on the table. Not as proof, but as memory that finally had listeners. The second spring arrived differently in Green Hollow Valley. It did not announce itself with rain or sudden green. It came slowly. In stages first, the return of birds to the fence lines, then the deeper color in the clover patches, then the way the soil stopped cracking even after long afternoons of sun. Mercer Dairy changed first in ways no one expected to notice. Their trucks still came and went, but lighter. Their barns were quieter at night. Their fields, once trimmed into perfect uniformity, began to show irregular greens against patches of rest, strips of recovery, edges left uncut. Caroline called it corrective rebalancing, but everyone in the valley understood what it really was. They were learning to listen. She came to my farm one morning without a convoy. Just a single pickup. No consultants, no presentation boards, only a folder and the kind of silence that no longer tried to prove anything. Elena opened the gate for her. Caroline nodded in thanks, something small but real. We met near the lower pasture, where my father's soil had always held its richest breath. The ground there was dark again, soft underfoot, alive in a way that made even standing feel like interruption. Caroline looked at it for a long time. I used to think efficiency meant control, she said. I did not answer immediately. She continued, now I think it might mean balance you don't have to force. Elena stood slightly behind me, watching her carefully. Caroline opened her folder and placed something on my hands. A printed page. It was a soil recovery model, adjusted using our comparative field data. Not imposed, not extracted. Shared. At the bottom, in small type, was a note acknowledging traditional rotational practices as primary contributing reference. My father's language, translated into theirs. You didn't have to include us, I said. We did, she replied, because without your data, ours doesn't work anymore. That was the closest she came to apology. We walked the field together. Not as buyer and farmer, not as company and competitor, just 3 people moving through soil that had finally stopped being an argument. At the fence line, Caroline stopped. There is one more thing, she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn notebook. Not hers. Her father's. Inside were handwritten notes, faded and uneven, about grazing cycles, rest periods, and soil texture observations. At the bottom of one page written in a hand older than hers, was a line she read aloud. "The land is never improved by forgetting what it taught before you arrived." Elena touched the edge of the notebook gently. "That sounds like Grandpa," she said. Caroline smiled faintly. "Maybe all fathers say the same things in different languages." I looked across the valley. The dairy barns were still there. The fences still divided ownership. Nothing had disappeared. But something essential had shifted. The land no longer felt like a competition between systems. It felt like continuity. That evening, I placed my father's soil calendar back into the kitchen drawer, not as something fragile to protect, but as something that had finally finished being ignored. Elena turned off the porch light. Caroline's truck disappeared down the valley road. And for the first time in a long time, the soil beneath our feet did not feel like something we were trying to prove. It felt like something that had already decided to endure.